We are a few days after the baseball trade deadline, and the Blue Jays were active, but they were not extraordinary deals. They were all deals that could have been anticipated and were anticipated in advance. Should you think the Blue Jays have done something more?
Yeah, I definitely thought so. I mean, you look at the market. I mean, every year, because of the expanded playoffs, it has become a seller's market. This is like a trend that's going on across baseball now, ever since they added the additional wild card teams. There's so few sellers that when you are selling, you tend to get a king's ransom in return. So, I mean, I think Ross Atkins did well with the trades he did make. To me, I think it was a mistake that they didn't go further, though. I mean, I have a lot of trouble seeing how this team can turn things around. We've heard a lot of talk in the last month or so about how the intention of this team is to retool and not rebuild. Well, there's an awful lot of holes that need to get plugged for next season, a lot of heavy lifting that has to be done this offseason. And I don't see how this team is going to be able to turn things around in just 6 months. And so if you're looking at it from that lens, I mean, Chris Bassett was a guy who the Jays could have got an awful lot of value for. I'm really surprised that they didn't do more to look to try and trade Chad Green. Both of those guys really could have netted a lot in return, especially when you look at what the Jays were able to get for Yusei Kikuchi. So, I mean, they did well for the pending free agents, but those were deals they had to make. To me, they're trying to do patchwork solutions a little bit to try and remain competitive next year, and I just don't think that's realistic. And so, I think Bassett and Green in particular are the guys that they really could have got something for. I understand the reason why they didn't. I mean, Bo Bichette's injured right now. He's not a guy you would trade. His value's a little bit low. You hope to recoup more in the future when they probably do eventually have to look at dealing him. And Vladimir Guerrero is a guy that I think the Jays still would like to sign long term. Whether or not that can happen, who knows? But I understand those scenarios. It's the Chris Bassett and Chad Green not getting traded because a year from now, if they're not in it, I mean, those guys have a lot of value right now. You don't know what the scenario is going to be next year. I mean, it's going to be another seller's market if the Jays aren't in it. But Chad Green could be hurt. Chris Bassett could be struggling or could be hurt. Those guys have a lot of value today. They might not have a lot of value a year from now. And so I think it was a missed opportunity to kind of even replenish the minor league system even more.
Well, they replenished the minor leagues, I guess, but did they get anybody that can help this team next year?
Well, that's the question. I mean, if you're trying to retool and get back into it immediately, I mean, they got some nice depth pieces, but those aren't depth pieces that you can just immediately rely on. I mean, Jake Bloss is a nice depth piece as a starting pitcher. This team hasn't had any starting pitching depth for the last 2 years. Anytime anyone's gone down with an injury, they've really had trouble plugging the fifth spot of the rotation. So, he's a guy who could be that piece for them, and he might look good a couple years down the road. But I don't think he's someone that you just automatically lock into a starting rotation job next year. I mean, he really is more of a depth piece. And Joey Laperfido is a guy who is probably the closest to being, a major league component. He's got an interesting mix of speed and power. But again, I mean, is he someone that you're going to lock into as your starting left fielder next year? Probably not. I mean, you're more likely looking at him to fill the Kevin Biggio role at the start of this season and then go out and get somebody else. And so none of those guys equate to being quick fixes. It really just kind of improves the depth and kind of makes up for the fact that this team has done such a poor job in drafting and player development. Now, really dating back 5, 6 years that they've been having these struggles. It helps that component, and so they'll be a little bit more protected. But it doesn't do anything really for your starting lineup, starting rotation, or bullpen to try and get this team back into contention quickly.
Do you think?
This.
Sorry, John, go ahead.
Well, no, I just the thought process about acquiring all these bodies. Isn't this a classic case, Gregor, of probably quantity over quality at this point?
Yeah, to a certain extent, for sure. I mean, it's almost like the Jays had another draft within the span of a week, and so it's trying to make up for some of the missed picks that they've had before. Some of the deals are definitely quantity over quality. I mean, you look at what they got back for Danny Jansen, in particular. Not high-end guys, but pieces that may turn into something. Some of the minor deals were more lottery tickets, which you're just hoping that maybe one of those guys eventually pans out. The Kikuchi one, it was a little bit more quality, even though there was quantity component to that too. I mean, that was I was surprised. I think a lot of people across baseball were surprised at how much the Astros gave up for Kikuchi, especially because Kikuchi had really been struggling for the last 2 months. The Jays probably got more for him than the Dodgers gave up for Jack Flaherty, and Jack Flaherty was supposed to be the top starter, really, who was known to be available for sure at this year's deadline. So they got some nice pieces there. But I mean, yeah, you look at the sheer number of guys. It almost does feel more like a draft than a trade deadline. And Jake Bloss and Joey Laperfido, Charles McAdoo that they got for Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. Those are nice pieces, but it's not like there's a top 50 prospect in this group that's a can't miss guy. Some of these are definitely dart throws and that you hope turn into a piece for you.